We're live on Substack Live. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you. And good to see everyone else who's
Yeah.
here, whether you're live or watching this recording. Really good to have you with us. So normally when I go live, I am talking about creative courage. So my conversation series on Substack is called Stories of Creative Courage. And this one is a little bit different. In it, we're going to be talking about the creative use of AI. And so I'm here with Tom Parson, and I'm going to introduce Tom in a moment. But I feel like it would be really good, Tom, to kind of say how we arrived at this conversation, why we're here talking about the creative use of AI today. So, yeah, do you want to start? And then I'll add in my pieces as well.
Mm. Yeah, so I was a guest on the Stories of Creative Courage series. It have been in July? Um, and yeah,
Mm,
we were basically, I was kind of talking about my experience with creativity and with kind of my journey. And we got also coming from tech. I'm quite interested in AI. I'm a bit of an AI and tech optimist, so I was kind of trying it out. And then we were like, actually, yeah.
yeah. It was. I have to say, the tech is a little wonky today, which is quite ironic when we're talking
Okay.
about AI. I don't know if it's a connection your end or my end, but we can persevere. It's not too bad. It's just a bit of a delay on the conversation, but we'll see how we get on. Um, yeah, so it was kind of we touched on AI, I think, in that episode, which is episode 4. I checked today of Stories of Creative Courage, and AI came up in a conversation. And we realized that there was probably a lot more that we could talk about and a lot more to say around AI and creativity. So
Yeah,
here we are
definitely.
having a part 2 of the conversation, and I feel like okay. So I'll introduce Tom. I'll introduce you, Tom, to people who are joining us here, and welcome. And then we'll talk about like what it is that we're interested in, why we're having this conversation, and how it connects to creativity and to essence as well, and to being human, which is the main point of what we're going to talk about. So people may know me. I am a coach, a creative coach, a writer, and a facilitator and space holder. And Tom is a really amazing tech entrepreneur and innovation consultant. And I really love that job title because I feel like you do really good work, Tom, in that space of really facilitating innovation in the corporate space and other creative spaces. And you're also a creative yourself as well. So, you're a musician, you're a composer. So you're really kind of straddling these worlds, different worlds of like the corporate space, of technology, entrepreneurship, and creative practice. And that's one of the reasons I think we vibed when we first met. We really kind of hit it off because we realized there were good conversations that we could have. So that's you, Tom. And I guess, today our conversation is going to be around the possibilities of artificial intelligence and really about creativity and what that is and how artificial intelligence might support it. And also, there's this word that I know you use a lot and I use a lot in my work, which is co creation. And I'm really fascinated by this word and this concept. And I really want us to get into like, what does that mean to both of us? And how might AI kind of facilitate or expand our experience of co-creation and what it is to co-create?
Yeah,
Um, does that capture it, I think, in terms of like what we want to cover?
definitely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Great. So let's dive into. I suppose I'd really love to have, before we kind of go into like the possibilities of AI and stuff, like how you use AI in your work. What's your interest in it? Just as a kind of general, you know, kind of paint the landscape for us, if you like, so that we know where you're coming from with it.
Yeah, definitely. So, I have always been into like tech, and I come from kind of a software development background, so I'm always kind of curious about tech and interested in how we can use tech, to kind of do better work. With AI, I was sort of like. I wasn't like a super early adopter of AI, but I have a friend, Phil, who is extremely into AI and was very excited about it when it was kind of first becoming mainstream, maybe last year. And he was telling me all the different kinds of things that he was doing with it. And so I started to just get a bit curious about that and just started to kind of use it for some pretty kind of rudimentary things, just kind of like how you might use it, how you might use Google, just kind of like asking
Mm.
it questions and kind of like using it as a bit of a research tool. And then slowly just sort of getting to grips with it as a tool, and as a kind of interface, and just trying to figure out how I could use it in more kind of with more creative applications and how I could kind of use it as a bit of a kind of co-creator or like creative coach or kind of partner, as if you were kind of talking to someone about what you were doing creatively. And then just, yeah, had a lot of fun kind of exploring that and kind of figuring out the limitations of it and kind of what it's good at, what it's not so good at. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I suppose the first thing to say is this is a conversation about the creative possibilities of AI and the potential of it. And I know that there will be lots of people who are you called yourself AI optimist, and I think
Mhm.
that's really interesting. There are plenty of AI pessimists as well, and I think it's really important to flag that there are limitations, there are problems with it,
Yeah.
notwithstanding, perhaps environmental effects and
Yeah.
so on. And we don't want to kind of ignore those. Like, we recognize and acknowledge that those are there, but we're not primarily having a debate about the kind of pros and cons of AI. Really, we're here to think about this interface of AI and creativity. So I feel like it's important to be upfront about that, first of all.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about possibility and AI and how AI can foster creative possibilities. I'm curious how you see that in the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really interesting because I think AI, or at least the kind of AI tools that I'm going to be talking about, which is like large language models or LLMs, which is like ChatGPT or like Gemini or Copilot or Claude, things like that. Um, they work by kind of digesting huge amounts of information and then sort of consolidating that and giving it you in kind of like bite-sized pieces or in kind of summarizations. Um, and so in that respect, AI is like it's like the average, it's kind of like it's kind of the average or the kind of broadest view of a big set of information. Um, but you can kind of use that to your advantage and kind of think about like we can be using AI to offload certain parts of our thinking, certain parts of our creativity, or creative process, um, to sort of to free us up to do more creative work. So if we've kind of got kind of analytical or mechanical or logical parts of what we do, AI is really good at that because it's good at kind of systematically going through steps and it's good at analyzing information and things like that. And if we can kind of offload parts of that, it does free up a lot of possibility and it creates a lot more room for us to be more kind of intuitive or empathetic or authentic and kind of do all these things that are uniquely human, right? So
Mm.
I do believe that like it can help us get closer to what makes us us and give us more opportunity to be creative by taking away these things that actually aren't really that interesting to a lot of creative people, these kind of systematic, logical things that actually AI is quite good at.
So like research tasks and things, do you mean, in one
Yeah,
sense?
and just
Or
kind
yeah.
of yeah, and because, when you think about creativity, when I think about creativity, it's not just like a singular act. Creativity is like a process that, like you say, it involves research, it involves reflection, it involves kind of iteration and sort of ideation and editing and finally kind of expression. So there's almost like the bit at the end that everybody sees where you actually kind of express that creativity or you share that creative work. There's so much stuff that comes before that, that's part of creativity that actually we don't need our kind of humanity and our humanness. There's certain parts of it that are kind of better. We can kind of pour our humanity into certain parts of this process, and other parts of that process are kind of are more systematic and more logical, like the research or like the kind of like editing and things like that.
So it's like outsourcing certain tasks that maybe free up space,
Yeah,
capacity, headspace, creativity to really dive into, I guess, the meaning and purpose and what it is that we want to express, how we want to write, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I love that. I hadn't really thought about that way of thinking about, AI as, we have so many different constituent parts in any one creative practice, so you've just kind of laid them all out really beautifully for us. There's ideation, there's iteration, there's the kind of testing, there's the critical aspect of it. So as a writer, I might kind of free write, just like brain dump on a page, on a piece of paper, or onto my laptop. And that's the kind of mining for ideas into the ideation part of it. And then I begin to kind of form it. And then at the end, there's the sort of, I need to create a structure for it. I need to edit it. I need to proofread it. So all of those different parts. And as you say, it's not a linear process either. Often, we might I might maybe write one draft and then structure that and then have to restructure it. So there's this almost like this cyclical process that can go on.
Mm.
The way you're talking about AI is like the AI attends to different parts, frees up space for us to do certain things, and we outsource others. And it speaks to this processual nature of creativity, which is that it's a big process. You don't just sit down and write something in one block in 20 minutes with all of the parts taken care of. It's like it's a process.
Mm.
So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum either. It happens in response to constraints and kind of in
yeah.
response to information and opinion and things like that. And I think um, I found, and we can get into kind of some specific examples, but I found with tools like ChatGPT, um, it's much more interesting for me to use them if I ask them to ask me questions or I ask them to challenge me on things. And I can kind of use it like you might do like a muse or a creative partner or something like that, where it means that rather than me working in isolation and kind of working in a vacuum in my little studio or whatever it is, I can kind of have this kind of like creative partner, but that is kind of endlessly patient and like never judgmental, and I can just kind of throw like half baked ideas and I don't have to worry about like sounding smart or sounding creative or about having good ideas. I can just sort of like talk through my thoughts and thinking and kind of ask this AI to sort of like point out connections in things that I've made, in things that I've said, or kind of ask me questions about my personal experience of that, and to kind of help me to really hone in on my kind of expression of what I'm talking about. Because
Mm,
one thing I get a bit hung up on is like I'll have a creative idea and then because of just my personality, I'm a bit of a like people pleaser. So I'll start to think about like, well, if I express this idea, how can I do that in a way that's going to land with people and that's going to kind of be well received? But actually, I've asked AI to help me to think about like how can I be doing this in a way that's more authentic to me, and kind of get the AI to sort of ask me like, what's your personal experience of this? And if you were to kind of write about this and no one were to ever read it, what would you say? And these kind of questions that aren't they're not kind of rocket science questions, but they're just kind of things that I forget when I get caught up in the creative process, you know?
mm. Yeah, I love that. It's interesting that you mentioned people pleaser because I was going to say, like, playing devil's advocate. Some people would say, well, AI is it's just there to please you. It's there to serve. It's there as a kind of virtual assistant. It's only there to like serve your needs and it won't push
Mm.
back. So yeah,
Yeah.
what would you say to that?
Yeah,
How
I
would
think
you counter that
that's so
argument?
true. And like AI, especially ChatGPT, I think they had a lot of criticism for how sycophantic it is. And it's very like
Mm,
everything you say to it, it's just like, oh, amazing observation, great idea. Like that's brilliant that you've pointed that out. And it's like, okay. But I think like and OpenAI had to put out a statement that just said like we acknowledge that this is problematic because it's kind of a lot of people's relationships with their with ChatGPT was kind of getting really questionable and kind of unhealthy, because it would just constantly tell them what they wanted to hear. But that is just kind of the default behavior, and I think I know that when I've asked AI to not respond like that, and when I've given it very specific instructions about what I want it to do and be in this context, um, more than wanting to like kind of make more than wanting to sort of compliment me, AI just wants to like serve and like do what you ask. Do you know what I mean? In this
mm,
context,
mm,
when we're talking about ChatGPT, so yeah, if you ask it that, it will happily oblige, and I can say to it like, be a ruthless critic, to like no holds barred, like don't worry about my feelings or anything, and it will. If you ask it to, it will absolutely do that, and it's not gonna. I think we should talk a bit about maybe an hour later, just like obviously when we talk about this stuff, we're not kind of we're not talking about AI as a replacement for a person. So we're not talking if when AI is kind of being critical or kind of giving us feedback, that's never going to be a replacement for the kind of like the subjective feedback from a human with all of their lived experience and preferences and personality and whatever. But it is just a different kind of feedback, and it's a feedback that we have yet to experience. Until we've got to this point with this kind of AI technology.
Mm,
And I believe it's an interesting type of feedback. It's definitely not a substitute for human feedback and for kind of getting feedback from people, but it's just an interesting kind of thought kind of process and creative process. It's like it's a tool, it's a toy that we can use to
mm.
kind of further our creativity.
Mm. So essentially, what you're talking about is, using training the AI, having the right prompt, knowing how to, I guess, not manipulate. I suppose it is manipulating it in a way, manipulating the tool in order to achieve an effect that creates a more human experience, or more like a deeper experience, rather than just attending to the surface. Like you're not just talking
Mm,
about churning out lots of text in that very surface way. What you're talking about is like that challenger, that pushback, that rigorous critic, so
yeah,
kind of constructing it as such, which obviously has to come from a human place. You have to know what you want. You have to be attuned, shall we say, on the inside to know what you want to achieve with your expression, with your final text. So it requires that human input in a way.
yeah. And it requires that human intention, like you said, because I feel like
Yeah.
one thing AI doesn't have is intention. It's just kind of creating stuff for the sake of it. And it's just kind of borrowing influences and making something and putting it. I think the intention of human creativity and human art is what makes us connect with it. And we connect with whether it's the intention, whether it is the actual intention or it's our perceived intention of the artist or the creator. That's what we kind of connect with a lot of the time. But yeah, I totally kind of yeah, in terms of like sort of I see it as like configuring the AI, because I think I'm very keen to like keep reminding myself that AI is a technology, it's a tech product, it's like an app. It's not like, because you use the word like manipulating, which is you would use that to talk about people usually, or maybe like form, if you're kind of manipulating shapes and things like that. But I'm keen on I still think about AI as like I'm configuring it, I'm kind of customizing it. It's a technology product that I'm using essentially.
Mm.
Because I think that's a really important distinction for me. Um, because when I first started using ChatGPT and kind of just talking to it and asking it questions and stuff, it is very easy to get kind of lulled into this sense of like you're having a conversation with something, but you're not at all. It's a technology product. It's something. It's just like a predictive text thing. It's not. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have an opinion. It's just kind of like giving you responses that it thinks you're going to find useful. But absolutely that process of configuring the AI, and I think a another really kind of important thing to think about there is the data that this AI is using when it responds to you. So by default, if we're just using something like ChatGPT, it's been trained on like masses of data, obviously, sometimes with questionable sources, and we can't necessarily control like which data it uses and which it doesn't when it responds to us. Whereas there's some really interesting other tools that we can use. Like I don't know if you've heard of like Notebook LM from Google. Um, so
No,
Notebook
tell us
LM
more.
is like, yeah, so like an LLM, like ChatGPT is like a large language model, a large language. It's used lots of language. Notebook LM is like Google's product, which is basically like you give it kind of a notebook of your information and then it uses that rather than all the large data. It uses just your data. Um, so there's a lot of really interesting potential there with creativity where you kind of maintain this notebook inside Notebook LM with all of your data and things like that. And it's primarily meant for like academics and research papers. So you kind of load in a load of research papers and then you can get Notebook LM to like spot connections between things and draw parallels and kind of remind you of things that you might have written about a year ago that's kind of similar to what you're talking about now. But the great thing about Notebook LM is that it doesn't have any outside data. So it's not going to kind of try and influence you with anything. It's not going to kind of introduce new ideas that you haven't put into your kind of space. So that kind of thing is really interesting to me, like how you can sort of give an AI stuff that is authentically you and it's kind of stuff that I've written and I've created, and then just use AI like you would any other creative kind of process. If you're a painter and you've made something and then you want to kind of dip it in some kind of substance to change the color or change the effect or whatever, or if I'm a musician and I want to apply some kind of like audio effect to what I've made, to me, that use of AI is kind of just the same as that. It's like I've created something and I'm putting it through this AI lens to see what comes out the other end. And then I'm going to kind of do something else with that. You know, I'm not just going to kind of ship that up and publish it. I'm just
Mm.
using it as a step in the process, you know?
Yeah. So it's almost like the kind of back and forth. You know, you create something, you get AI to then configure a response, and then it kind of keeps looping in that way. Is that kind of how you use it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah. I think there's
Mm,
also kind of, I guess what I'm talking about and what we're talking about is like two distinct uses of AI when we talk about creativity. One is like AI as an active participant. So we're giving it something and we're asking it to do something with it and then come back to us, you know, and then like I was saying, that's kind of like a stage in the process, just like it would be to apply some paint to something or whatever. But then the other way is kind of more what we were talking about earlier, which is almost like as a coach or like a kind of muse or a partner, where you're not asking the AI to directly contribute, you're just asking it to ask you questions and challenge you and things like that. And a great,
mm,
like kind of a story I have of that is like when I've been doing more writing this year. So I've launched a new business this year, as you know, and part of that is me trying to write more and kind of get the word out about what I do and things like that. So writing like social media posts and like blogs and things like that. And at the start of the year, I was like, oh, I'll see what I can do with ChatGPT. You know, ever curious, ever the tech optimist. I was like, I'll see how ChatGPT can help me with this. Um, and I did get ChatGPT to like draft some stuff, and then I was like, I'll get it to draft this thing. I'll kind of give it some points that I want to make and like the kind of overall goal that I want to achieve with this like LinkedIn post or whatever Instagram post, and then see what it comes back with. And then it would often come back with something, and then at the time, I was like, "Oh, that looks great. That's very legible. It kind of looks legit. It looks like what I would see on LinkedIn, and that's no coincidence, obviously, which we'll come on to." And I was like, "Okay, maybe I'll just make. I don't really like that bit, so I'm going to like change that bit. I'm going to change that bit, but largely this is fine." And then I would post it. And now, if I look back on those posts now, I'm like, "God, that doesn't sound like me," or like it just sounds like sort of LinkedIn slop. Do you know what I mean? It just sounds like it's very LinkedIn, and it to the point where like it almost says nothing. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it's quite that bad. I'm probably
mm,
being a bit too
mm,
self-critical, but to the point where it just kind of loses its message, you know. So I learned that lesson about like AI is definitely not very good at actually just creating stuff, and I really don't believe AI is going to replace human creativity and kind of authentic intention behind what we do and that kind of connection that people have with writing or other forms of art and creativity. But I think that so I kind of learned that lesson, and I was just like not really that into using it like that. Um, and but then that's when I started to think like, okay, well, parts of it I liked. Like sometimes I would give it stuff, and it would come back, and the way that it structured it wasn't a way that I would think to do it. But actually, I find that really useful to actually kind of have the start is about this, and then it kind of is about this, and then that's how I can get to the end that I want to do. So that kind of like writing skills is something that I was because I'm not a writer really. So that was something that was kind of useful to me to learn, almost like learn how to write in a way that is good for social media and stuff. So then I
mm,
was like, how could I kind of, I don't want it to write for me, but I want to kind of ask it to help me figure out what I want to say and how I want to write and things like that. And I want it to be more authentically me. I don't just want it to be like I say, like LinkedIn slop or whatever. I want it to be like written by me and people connect with me and my intention. So then with ChatGPT and other tools like this, you can create little like projects or like custom versions of ChatGPT, which is quite easy to do. It's not as difficult as it sounds. And so I created this kind of custom project where I told the AI, when I give you something I've written, or when I ask you about writing, I never want you to write anything for me. So first of all, don't ever write anything for me. Second of all, I want you to ask me questions to help me get to kind of the essence of what I'm trying to say and to help me make it more personal. So now, and among other things that I asked it, kind of these like criteria of like, this is how you should behave when I talk to you, that kind of thing. So now when I'm writing, I'll basically have a conversation with this AI and say like, I want to write a post about such and such, and I believe this and this about this topic. But that alone isn't an article. That's just like a couple of sentences. So how can I sort of make this point? And then what the AI does now is it asks me questions, and it would ask me things like, well, if you were reading this article, what would you want it to include? And do you have any personal experience of this? And oh, you do. Oh, what was that like? And how did you feel when you were experiencing that? And what did you learn from that? And like, and we'll have a conversation. It's not just like it's asking me a template of questions. It's like probing me and like it keeps on asking me. And I've told it to keep asking me until I tell it to stop. So it just like keeps on asking me questions. And then when we go down one path, it will kind of stop there and ask me a different question about something else and so on. And at no point does it write anything for me, but it just kind of asks, it encourages me to almost like go through a checklist of like things I should be considering when I'm writing. But it's like a very personalized kind of more fun checklist to do. It's not just like I'm remembering these points. I'm actually kind of having this conversation. It's kind of a more fun way of doing that. And then that just kind of gets my juices flowing and it helps me think about how I want to write. Then I'll write a draft. Then I'll give it to ChatGPT because I'm still interested in kind of how I can make my writing better, you know. So I'll give it to ChatGPT, but now obviously I've told it never to write anything for me. So now I've just asked it, like, how could I make this article better? And I kind of give it context and say, like, this is a blog, or this is an Instagram post, or this is a LinkedIn post, or this is a newsletter. And now it will say things like, oh, this line, you kind of say this here, but like earlier on, you already said this. So like that might be a nice time to like hark back to that and kind of mention that again. Or it might say something like, you've repeated the word intelligent there like 3 times. You might want to change one of them. Or like, you know, it'll say things like this, which are sort of like, I don't know, creative writing 101, I guess, where you might learn that
Mm.
if you've done a course or something. So that I find way more useful. And now I just kind of take those pointers and just improve it. And then that's kind of, and then obviously I might do other edits and stuff like that. But that's the kind of journey I've gone on with writing, where I started out being like, oh, I'll just see what ChatGPT does. And then eventually now I'm like, it's still useful to me and it has its place to me, but it's much more as a partner and a kind of, and like a coach or kind of someone to challenge me, you know, something to challenge me.
Yeah, I love it. And how you've laid out that process really illustrates what we were talking about earlier about how AI kind of has all these, or creativity has these different functions, you know. So there, the coach aspect, you know, like training the AI, the large language model to kind of come back at you and keep asking you
Mm.
questions until it stops. That's the sort of very coaching, mentoring kind of function. And
Yeah.
then actually I hear the kind of editor critic, you know, at the end part, which is, oh, here's a repetition, here's a better way that you could phrase
Mm.
that, you know, here's a way you could fix the sentence structure or whatever. So, I mean, that's just two functions right there. But what I'm really fascinated by, Tom, is, you know, and you're talking about when you talk about your experience of like writing something for LinkedIn and you want to avoid the slop, you know, the LinkedIn slop, and you want something that's me, like, you know, like you read this old stuff and said, that's not me. So
Mm.
it's like, can you say more about how you're using AI to get to that kind of meanness
Mm.
in a way? Like it's kind of building on what you've already said, but I'm really curious, and you've used the word essence as well, which, you know, I am a big, you know, I'm a big fan of that word and that concept in the realm of creativity. So I'm curious about how, yeah, all of that. Just respond to that as you will.
Yeah. That's like a big question. I think,
Yeah, no.
yeah, I think, so how am I kind of using AI to sort of, yeah, to be more me, I guess, and to kind of think about, well, especially when I'm like writing and things like that. I think, it's definitely in that kind of, the questions is a big part of it for me, like asking it to ask me questions and not being prescriptive about what those questions are, you know. So it more kind of simulates a conversation with someone where I don't know what they're going to say and I don't know what they're going to ask me, you know. So I think like, as someone who, because I've spent a long time running a business and managing a team, and I was kind of part of a, you know, an ensemble workplace kind of thing. And now this year, I'm very much like solo consultant, and I'm kind of working for myself a lot and stuff. So it is very confronting, and it's kind of like I'm spending a lot of time with myself and like thinking about what I want to write about and stuff like that. And I think like, I guess I guess one of the ways, this might be a bit of a cop out, but I guess one of the ways that it's helping me is that I'm excited about it. I'm excited about being creative with AI, and I'm excited about figuring out ways that I can use AI to be creative. And so more than anything, it's getting me excited about being creative again. You know, it's getting me excited about writing. It's getting me excited about expressing myself and kind of thinking about what I want to say in a new way. You know, so it kind of is a bit of an injection of novelty or an injection of
Mm,
life, and it's kind of a new avenue to pursue. And I think any time in life where we get to experience new things, it gives us an opportunity to learn more about ourselves, right? And like how we
mm,
use this thing and how it kind of manifests in us, you know? Um, but yeah, I think it's a combination of that, and it's the novelty and the fact that I'm finding it exciting and just fun. And it's the questions, it's getting it to challenge me because I think when we talked earlier about like AI is like the average, it's the kind of broadest view, it's the kind of least common denominator, I guess, of like all this information that's out there. So therefore, like the questions are going to be sort of things that I I don't know. I feel like I probably haven't. They're almost like so obvious that I haven't asked myself them, like because it's almost like yeah, things like, do you have a personal story or like, what do you believe is the important cause of that? And I'm a bit like, oh, no one, why? And no one's ever asked me that. Like, but it's kind of just like the most obvious thing to ask, and sometimes that's useful. I don't know. Does
mm.
that answer the
Yeah,
question?
it does. It does. So two things. I this idea of like excitement about possibility, it feels like with your kind of co-creation of with AI, that it's almost opening up this field of possibility of creative potential, right? So
Mm,
which I think is really interesting because that's often the opposite to how people talk about AI in writing, which is that it closes it down, it becomes that slop as you put it, or it can be
yeah.
incredibly surface, that kind of averaging out of
Mm,
expression. So what I hear is the opposite of that, actually, that used in the
yeah.
right way and co-create and created, well, collaborated with in the right way, it actually then produces this effect. And you're talking about like inner exploration there, actually, when
Yeah.
you're kind of AI forces you to go back into yourself and really examine and explore, what is it I'm thinking, what is it I'm feeling, which
Mm,
I think this is and I agree, this I think is the exciting possibility and potential of these tools.
yeah.
I've had similar experiences and I've used prompts in the same kind of way. I never get it to write for me like you. I don't want it to produce that stuff, but what I want is a way of really reflecting back what I'm thinking and feeling on the inside. And I think we've had this conversation before, Tom, where I've said to you, I've had experiences where I've been writing stuff and I've been challenged to such a degree that I'm literally sitting there on my chair sweating because it's bringing
Mm,
up all of my vulnerabilities, all my
mm,
paranoia, all my kind of struggles, with myself. So I'm having this like internal battle that is very human, you know, courtesy of this entity or this, piece of technology that is a tool and not a human being at all. And yet it's
mm,
provoking this incredibly human emotion or this emotional response, which is at the heart of being human. And so the kind of space it opens up, the emotional and creative space it opens up, can open up, I think is really fascinating because
yeah.
my experience then is then I'm more available. There's more of me to write what I want to write and to share
Exactly. Yeah.
that with
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
So,
I agree that when most people talk about AI, they have a fear that it diminishes our kind of thought process, or like we're kind of thinking less when we're using AI. And there's a lot of evidence to that. There's a lot of evidence that AI can definitely be used in that way. It can be used we can use it as a crutch. I think with any technology, it's about how we use it and our intention behind it. And I think that I do believe that using things like AI has the potential to make us more curious and more interested, because like we were talking earlier about, like AI is this like endlessly patient thing that we can just ask endless questions, even like stupid questions, or like we can just be like exploring topics endlessly with this thing that never gets tired and has this infinite knowledge of all these different things that we can learn about and explore and talk about. Um, and I think the more you do that, the more I've done that, the more you really do appreciate that, like with these AI tools, it's like rubbish in means rubbish out. If you just kind of like try and take it, like kind of like what I was doing at the beginning with my LinkedIn post. If you just kind of try and take a bit of a shortcut and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna give it sort of like the bare minimum prompt and just like get it to do it for me. Do you know what I mean? That's like
mm,
you're gonna get rubbish out at the other end of that. And so it almost like trains you to ask better questions and to kind of think about things in a more like detailed, or a way that is sort of like more like specific to what I want to say. Do you know what I mean? So it teaches me, rather than just thinking in my head, thinking the question of like, I need to write a LinkedIn post about blah blah blah. it teaches me more to think about like, well, what is a LinkedIn post about that from Tom Parson? Like, what does Tom Parson think about that, and how would he write that post? You know, so it teaches me
Mm,
how to ask that question, which is what I would really need to ask to start that process. So I think, I don't know. I do. I'm a very curious person generally. I like learning about things and asking questions and things like that. But I think AI has. I had this kind of burst of curiosity when I first started using ChatGPT, because I was like, oh, suddenly I can ask this thing anything. I can learn about anything. I can ask how this works or that works or what this means. All these things that I've kind of been maybe a bit embarrassed to ask, or like I've just never thought to ask, and things like that. So I do think that in my case, with the way that I'm now using AI, at least in recent months, I'm kind of touching on and just sort of honing in on this way of using these AI tools that makes me more curious, asks better questions, makes me think more, makes me more critical of what the AI is saying. And I do believe there's a way that we can work with AI like that. But I just don't think that the manufacturers of these tools design them in such a way that that's the first way you use them. You know, the first way you use them, because the way that they market them, especially all the like smartphone manufacturers, you know, you see the like Apple ads and the Samsung Galaxy ads and whatever, all the kind of smartphone AI stuff is marketed at being like, we'll do it for you. We're so smart. Your phone is going to be so smart. It's going to do everything for you. Don't even worry about it. You can just do the bare minimum and we'll do everything. That's like how all AI stuff is kind of marketed, you know? But I think that, I don't know, I hope that changes. And I hope that kind of, I hope like OpenAI and whoever kind of learn from and take note of all the kind of studies that are being done, and the fear that people have around like actually relying on AI kind of makes you dumber, or it makes you kind of think less or whatever. And I hope that they really start to encourage more ways. In fact, there's a really good my friend Phil that I spoke about at the beginning, who's like super passionate about this. I'm going to give him a bit of a shout out. His name's Phil Birchenhall, and he loves AI, and he was actually on the OpenAI website as a case study because he used ChatGPT with his daughter Daisy, um, and Daisy loves their family dog. I'm totally going to butcher this because I can't remember the dog's name. But anyway, basically, he used ChatGPT to make like a maths tutor for Daisy that was like their family dog's character, and all the kind of maths conversations they had were all about like dog biscuits and dog friends and stuff. And basically, Daisy went from like really struggling in maths to like acing her GCSE maths and things like that. And it's just like a great example of like, if you can use these tools creatively and you can use them in a personal way, they really do have the capability to enhance us and to kind of be useful to us, and then kind of serve us in our creativity and what we want, you know.
I love that. That's a great case study, actually. It's a really good story as a
Yeah.
concrete example. Um, and we'll come on to like practicalities in a moment. But I just wanted to really emphasize what you said about how, this regular use of AI and in this way actually encourages us to ask better questions. And so for me, that curiosity
Mm,
is really key. Like ask better questions of ourselves, ask better questions in the world, ask better questions of our readers.
yeah.
I love that. I think that for me, that's at the heart of this, actually, is it's like, and as a coach, I love questions. The right questions
Mm,
just open up so much, insight, and, um, they address blind spots that we can't see. I just think, so that for
yeah.
me is like the crux of what we're talking about here. And that is co-creation, bearing in mind, you're
Mm,
talking to a tool, a technological tool, but nevertheless, it's sort of infused with, who you are, because you have like asked it to be who it wants to be, and trained it to be what it is,
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so let's like shift a bit to a more practical kind of focus then, Tom. A couple of things really. One is like, how do we, what would you recommend, someone who hasn't maybe used this stuff, is maybe a little bit resistant to it, or anxious about it, like what would be a good starting point?
Mm.
And also, how could you? I mean, I feel like this whole conversation in a way is countering resistance to these tools in a way. But I wonder, yeah, if you can say something about practical applications, and where would we begin if we hadn't used these tools before?
Yeah. So are we just talking about sort of creative people generally speaking, or specifically like writers?
Uh, yeah, creative people generally, so not just
Creative
writing,
people
but
generally.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or indeed maybe just anyone who wants to be more creative and, you know, that kind of thing.
exactly, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think like a great first step, because if you don't know already, many of these tools are free. They have a free plan, you know, that you can use to just kind of try them out. I would say after having used like Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT, I haven't used Copilot, but having used those, ChatGPT is definitely the best I've found in terms of this kind of stuff, in terms of like conversation and the way that it can respond and the way that it can kind of act in the way that you ask it to act and things like that. So I think I would give ChatGPT a go. And basically just kind of load up the website chatgpt.com. You just get presented with this prompt, this box, right? So I think when you're just starting out with this stuff, like we were saying in terms of like the better like the better data you can put in or the better prompt you can put in, the better response you'll get out. So I would encourage you to kind of play with it for a period of time. I think if you kind of I think the wrong attitude is to think like I'm going to set aside half an hour for this and I'm going to like give ChatGPT a go and I'm going to see how I get on and then I'll decide then if I like it or not. Because really, the value of something like that comes in kind of the more it kind of learns about what you, because something like ChatGPT will learn and remember key things about what you've said and stuff, and you can always see what it's remembered and you can delete stuff and things like that, so that you have control over that. But the value comes in kind of using it and getting used to how it responds and things like that. So I'd encourage you to try it in kind of small doses over like a week or something like that, just to kind of check in with it. But I think using it for like, to like you were saying earlier with like devil's advocate or kind of asking you challenging questions, or I think let's say you're kind of wanting to start a new project, you might tell it your idea and then ask it to kind of ask you about like what are some other approaches that you might consider there, or just ask it to ask you challenging questions. I think if you literally just go into it and kind of and say, I'm about to start a project or I'm working on a project, I feel a bit stuck with it. Here's my ideas. Ask me some challenging questions to help me move forward. If you just say something quite general like that, that's a good starting point to get to start getting to grips with kind of using it as more of a challenger and kind of a partner and a critical thinker.
Mm. Cool. Yeah. Um, yeah. What else do we need to know? Like, I like that point about kind of using it on a regular basis rather than just sort of trying it once and then keeping going. So, in your experience, like, how have you? I mean, you mentioned the word like configuring AI. How have you maybe like made some twists and turns, or how have you kind of shifted over time in terms of like your use of AI to make it more effective for you? I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about good questions, like learning better questions, but how else has it over time? How have you trained yourself to train it? If you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So
Mm,
kind of in general, I try and remind myself that, it's not a person. You don't have to say please and thank you. And you can just kind of be very blunt. In fact, saying please and thank you wastes energy. And like the OpenAI guys were just like, please stop doing that. So we don't need to do that, and treat it like, like a sort of like technology, like a kind of input output technology tool, like a software. Um, and the reason I say that is because you can, if it does something or says something that you're not happy with, or like it doesn't feel like good enough, or you want a different response, or whatever it might be. If we were using any other type of technology, you wouldn't question yourself if you were like, oh, this app hasn't done what I wanted it to do. I'm going to try and find a different way of doing what I want to do, or this response isn't, this kind of screen isn't what I expected. I'm going to try and find a different way of getting to where I want to go to. I think the only reason we don't think about that with stuff like ChatGPT is because it responds in a way that is like kind of human like. So, and we're not really used to dealing with humans in a way where we're like, wrong, insufficient, do it again. Do you know what I mean? But you can speak to
mm,
ChatGPT like that because it isn't a human, it's technology. So you can say things like, no, I don't. That's not what I meant. I meant this, or like, no, like, give me a different response, or no, whatever. You can kind of teach it how you want it to respond, and that's kind of a simple way of doing that, where you can basically just talk to it and tell it how you want it to respond to you, and you can say things like, you know, be very critical, be like no holds barred, kind of don't hold back kind of stuff. You can tell it stuff like that when you're prompting it, and it will oblige. A more sort of like reliable long-term way of doing that is, I use ChatGPT a lot, so all of my references are going to be ChatGPT, but I'm sure you can do this with the others as well. So with ChatGPT, you can create what's called a project, where if you create a project and then you start talking to the ChatGPT inside that project, you can give it specific notes and like context and stuff in that project that it will just bear in mind while you're inside that project. And you can also upload files and stuff that it will consider while it's in that project. So for me, I've got like a writing coach project where in the notes for that, this is where I've told it all that stuff like never write things for me. When I do this, like, in fact, I gave it like three modes. I said, like, whenever I give you a prompt, you should enter one of three modes. You should either enter like a critic or like an editor. You should enter or you should enter like a coach or kind of like a thought helper or whatever. I can't remember what the third one was. So now every time I talk to that, and I told it to tell me which mode it's in every time it responds. So now when I give
Mm.
it some writing, it'll be like mode two, critic, and then just like start talking. Um, so anyway, you can kind of get a bit creative with how you can configure these tools inside this project. Um, and that's where you can tell it stuff like your preferences and things like that. So that's kind of
Mm.
two different ways you can do that. You can just talk to ChatGPT and tell it, or you can kind of set up this project and kind of create this little environment where every time you interact with it, it kind of follows these rules that you've set out.
Yeah. What I love about that is it just, again, it comes back to creativity, like experimenting, trying,
Yeah.
not taking the first response that comes back. I mean, that is like the generative nature of creativity is just to keep going. Like,
Mm.
as a writer, like I don't necessarily, I might have five ideas, but actually the best ideas are going to be like six, seven, eight, nine, or 10, so keeping going rather than just taking the first ideas that come. And actually what you've just talked about there is using the generative potential, just keeping going, keeping tweaking, keeping co-creating with
Yeah.
the tool until you get the effect that then feels, as you put it, more me. It's the most me that I could be.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the kind of LinkedIn slop that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And
love that. I kind of, yeah. Go on.
we've seen this with technology repeatedly, where when a new technology emerges, it's very kind of like um linear and sort of surface level, like what we do with it. And an example is like the iPad is a good example. So like when the iPad came out, or like tablets came out, they were very much like consumption devices. Like, people just use them to like, well, not many people use them to be frank, but like people that did use them would use them to like read or like look at social media or to just scroll. They would just be using them for like consumption. But then as we kind of got more used to the capabilities of tablets and we got more interested in them, people now use them for like really creative stuff. Like people draw
Mm,
on them, people use them for like installations, people use them for like creative purposes basically, and people are kind of getting really interested with like how they can use that new medium. And I feel like something similar is going to happen with these AI tools, where right now we're just using them to ask them like about topics or whatever. Like many people are just using them like you would use Google. Um, but I think there will be the next stage is going to be kind of how we can sort of bend this technology and like twist it and break it and use it in ways that is unexpected. And that's kind of the real exciting bit that's kind of to come.
yeah, I love that. Creativity rather than consumption. And I think that's
Hmm.
really kind of, it sums up what we've been talking about in this whole conversation as well, like how we can consciously use this technology, use these tools in order to, expand ourselves creatively, expand ourselves even spiritually, I would argue, like because we're kind of enhancing our ability to connect, really, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, mind blowing, really, and yeah, exciting to see what's going to come. I feel like that's probably a good place to end the conversation. Tom, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. I've loved the whole run up to this conversation, like how it evolved out of a conversation already about creativity, and how we recognise that talking about AI in the realm of creativity is something that is interesting to both of us, hopefully interesting to the people who are watching this and have joined us. And thank you to everyone who's like joined us tonight, today, wherever you are in the world, to just to kind of to kind of see what we have to say. I will write up the show notes and post them somewhere. But just as a shorthand, like how can we find out more about you, Tom, your work, your innovation consulting, and your tech entrepreneurship?
Cool. Yeah. The best thing to do if you want to keep hearing more from me is if you go to bigecho.co.uk. The website is coming very soon. I'm like a bit behind on it, but I'll get it live very soon. But at the moment, there's a newsletter sign up. So if you want to go to bigecho.co.uk, you can sign up to the newsletter, and then you'll hear more about me. And you can also find me on like LinkedIn and Instagram and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tom. It's been great. I've loved this
Nice one.
conversation. And thank you
Yeah,
to
thanks
everyone
so
who's
much.
here. Yeah. All right. See you next time.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye bye.